and thank you for joining today. I'm Sonia Janja. I'm a PhD student at University College London and also Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew. And I'm here today thanks to my supervisory team, so Dr. Emily Woodhouse, Dr. Lewis Daly, and Professor Alex Antonelli. And my broad research interest is really looking at whether biodiversity policy accommodates the diverse uses and trade of wildlife. And I'm using urban ethnobotany to explore these human and nature entanglements. And at the moment, I'm at the kind of early stages of my data collection, so I'd really welcome any feedback on my methodology or any ideas going forward. Thank you. So within biodiversity policy, there are systems of governance for wildlife that have been created. And this has led to the exchange of wildlife to be deemed as both legal or illegal. And in this study, I'm using the term wildlife trade to refer to buying or selling harvested wild plants or animals. And wildlife trade can be national, regional, or international, and I'm interested in the international scale here. And there are many mechanisms to support legal trade, and one such mechanism is CITES, the Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species. And for example, here in this chart, it's showing CITES trade data over a 4-year period, and it was estimated at $9.3 billion US, so pretty high. But this is just one component of one mechanism that you can use for legal trade. So the figures for legal trade are much higher than that. But interestingly, about 60% of this trade was actually from wild sourced specimens. And the illegal trade has also been distinguished as one of the 4th most illicit trades in the world. So after guns, people, and drugs trafficking. And this map here is just showing its airport seizures data, and it's just highlighting the kind of vast network of seizures across the world. But what it mostly highlights is that a lot of the trade is coming from Asia and coming into Europe. And wildlife trade has, socioeconomic benefits, but unfortunately, whether it's legal or illegal, the focus is always on charismatic species. And this is why I was interested in looking at wildlife that was less represented. And so my interest in medicinal plant trade. And the majority of medicinal plants are traded in the wild, and it's an important source of income for millions of people. And there are many wild harvested plants that have been sustainably harvested for generations. And then there are some that are not, and those are the ones I'm interested in. But, you know, medicinal plants are critical for the health of humanity. And unfortunately, some of the global demand that has been put on this has put some pressure on some of these medicinal plants. And the demand for herbal medicine intersects conservation, as certain herbal medicines are derived from threatened species. So herbalism in the UK, there has been an increase in the use of medicinal plants in their products. And this is partly due to the migration of people and their traditional herbal remedies, which has introduced alternative and complementary medicine systems in the UK, where Western biomedical systems operate. And the increase also stems from herbal medicines being more accessible and available. And by this, I mean that the internet and social media has also empowered individuals with knowledge of herbal remedies, their uses and availability, and options to buy. And many of the plants and products are imported from biodiverse countries with holistic medicinal systems, such as India. Ayurveda is one of 6 recognized traditional systems of medicine in India. And Ayurveda is Sanskrit for knowledge or science of life. And it's an ancient materia medica, and it stemmed from teachings in Hindu philosophies. And in Ayurveda, the entire universe is composed of 5 elements, and that is Vayu, Jala, Akash, Prithvi, and Teja. And these 5 elements form the 3 basic humors of the human body in varying combinations. The 3 humors are known as doshas, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. And the doshas control the basic physiological functions of the body. And Ayurvedic medicine uses polyherbal formulations, and one of the formulations, one of the most popular tonics, can contain 67 ingredients. And there are at least, there's over 1,000 different species from the documented 7,000 Indian plants in the Indian medicinal systems that are in trade. And Ayurveda has been globalized, but there hasn't been a lot of studies published in the UK about Ayurvedic practice. So returning to my research interest on whether biodiversity policy accommodates the diverse relationships, uses, and trade of wildlife, my PhD is looking at a case study of Ayurvedic herbal plants in the UK to investigate whether, firstly, whether certain plants are traded in the UK and how are these plants being traded in the UK. And here I'm focusing on trade intermediaries, which include herbal suppliers and practitioners, but I'm also looking at online trade. And lastly, what is the role of biodiversity policy in conserving these medicinal plants? So from a literature review and scanning supplier catalogues that are available online to purchase in the UK, I found that there's at least 100 Ayurvedic plants that are in use in the UK. And there is a kind of a close relationship between them being edible and also medicinal. And there's many kind of culinary herbs that you'd be familiar with, such as ginger and turmeric, that are included on this list. But at the moment, I'm still kind of adding to this list, and then I will be kind of filtering through, still to determine my criteria on how I'll be kind of narrowing this list down. But of course, I'll be focusing on the species that are listed on CITES, and so far about a quarter of these species are listed on CITES. And then I've just got an example here of one of the CITES listed and not CITES listed plants. So Jatamansi is native to the Alpine Himalayas, and the roots are primarily used as a central nervous system relaxant. And then neem is used in treating inflammations and infections of the skin and digestive tract. And so I've also been evaluating how medicinal plants are conserved in global wildlife trade policy by examining the knowledge and prevalence of medicinal plants in this policy. And this has been done through an event ethnography and also doing interviews with CITES experts. So just briefly, in case anyone's not familiar with CITES, it's the Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, and it aims to ensure that global trade does not threaten wild populations. And there's about 38,000 species. The majority of these are plants, and they're either listed on Appendix 1, 2, or 3. Majority of plants are listed on Appendix 2, which allows trade, international trade, through a permitting system. And one of the kind of key meetings of CITES is a CITES Conference of Party meeting, so it's a COP for short. And this is where key decisions on which CITES species are listed or delisted from the convention are discussed. So in November last year, I attended the 19th meeting of the CITES Conference of Parties to conduct my event ethnography. The meeting lasts 2 weeks and was coined the COP of the Americas, as the last CITES COP was in the Americas about 20 years ago. So it happened in Panama City, beautiful Panama City. I've got a nice picture here of just how the cosmopolitan city is surrounded by rainforest. And the rest of the pictures are showing the Panama Convention Center. And there was a lot of prominence on displaying Panama's biological and cultural diversity. And the convention center was my home for 2 weeks. You get, with the long days, you quickly adapt to being in a bubble life. And around, sorry, I did not realize.
No, it's okay.
So
Try it now.
Okay, so this is my bubble life. There's around 2,500 people who attended the CITES meeting, representing governments and non-profits, and also intergovernmental organizations, which we an example of one of the meeting rooms. And here we discuss about 130 documents and striving for either mutual agreement or items are put to a vote. And I've also been conducting interviews with CITES experts themed around perceptions and understanding of wildlife trade, CITES decision-making, and also implementing this policy. So these are some of my findings. So across the interviews and also everything that I captured within the ethnography, medicinal plant knowledge was species specific to the country or region. So not many of the countries who don't use Ayurvedic products were familiar with those plants, which isn't too big a surprise, but of course, I thought there might be more attention given the fact that these discussions are happening globally. There is a desire amongst all the participants to understand supply chains further, particularly in medicinal plants. There was also a consensus that there's a bias in the amount of time that is spent on kind of charismatic species such as elephants, rhinos, and pangolins. And then even within that, within the plant discussions, those are dominated by timber. There is also concerns expressed that the decision making and the discussions are political when they should be based on the kind of scientific evidence of the proposals. And that there is also kind of concerns that certain countries are dominating and holding power on the floor. So some of the broader themes from this have been, well, firstly, the term wildlife has been analysed across, like, for what it means in terms of legislation. For in some countries, this doesn't actually include plants. And for example, there's no fungi listed on CITES. So the kind of taxonomic group that are represented in policy is not equal. And in there's also kind of competing legal policies for these frameworks. So such as like in timbers and fisheries, there's a lot of other policies that can collide with these natural resource governance systems. The concept of plant blindness has also come up, which is a concept described back in 1999 by Wondersee and Schussler as the inability to not notice plants and appreciate their value. And then I've also been pulling out that wildlife has a biopower or agency, and it shapes social, cultural, political, and economic practices. And it was very interesting to pick up on these power dynamics that are happening in the room. And there is a lot of strong Western influence in the discussions, particularly as sometimes in the discussion floor, you have to react very quickly. And it's countries who have the biggest teams who have that capacity to make those kind of decisions and engage in the discussions, especially if you're split across 2 committee rooms. And in some countries just have 1 person in each room, whereas other people can have a team of 4 in each. So there was a kind of difference there. And the use and trade of wildlife raises issues across many different arenas, from moral, ecological, and health, as well as regulatory arenas. So COVID-19 was also discussed quite a lot. My next research steps. So I'm going to be focusing on trade intermediaries in the UK. So I'm going to enhance my literature review of Ayurvedic plants, and I'll be sending an online survey aimed at Ayurvedic practitioners and suppliers. And the survey seeks to address which Ayurvedic plants are most commonly prescribed, their methods of consumption, their supply chain details, but also their perceptions on medicinal plant conservation. And then following that, I plan to conduct more in-depth interviews with the practitioners and suppliers to really kind of explore the depths of connection between herbal medicine and plant conservation in the UK. And I'm hoping also at this point, I will have more focused case studies on a CITES listed and a non-CITES listed plant to kind of go more in depth into what processes are making them sustainable, and or what's kind of, if the legislation is working, like why that is. And then I'll also be working on an automated online trade search, focusing on the medicinal plants identified from the literature and the survey. And I'm hoping this will allow me to determine if there are differences in the trade routes in terms of either availability, but also just like use, and any kind of like potential legal implications from this as well. So the differences between the suppliers and practitioners versus online trade. And I'm hoping to understand the nuances of that trade more. And yeah, lastly, I'm excited to explore this people and plant entanglement further. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, just wanted to ask if you have also, or if you're planning perhaps to look at the role of ecological certification systems like Fair Wild, in terms of the influence that they also have on trade and Ayurvedic plants in the UK.
Yeah, thanks for your question. So I have been looking at the species that are on certification schemes, particularly in Fair Wild, as it has at least one Indian medicinal plant that's traded in that system. But I feel there are other projects at the moment that have been exploring the use of certification schemes and sustainability of plants. So I'm not sure if I'll go in depth, but I will look at concepts of it.
Are you also looking at timelines when you conduct some vintage items? How long does a plant have been used per practitioners? Because if you did, that would be a very useful piece of information that doesn't really exactly fit into your research, but it would make the life of folks a lot easier. And we're trying to get these products legalized in say, for instance, the UK market. We need to know exactly since when they've been imported and used in the community.
Yeah, at the moment, I'm not documenting when they first came into use in the UK. But there are other projects like Q that are looking at the kind of the history of Ayurveda in the UK. So I'm hoping some of my research will complement that as well. Thanks.
I have a question back to the refer to one plant meat from India. I belong to India. Have you studied the survival rate of this plant also in India, UK, or in India? Because once I planted 10 plants of neem, and the moment they grew up, people planted and then. So there's hardly any possibility of studying these things of nature.
Oh.
Have you done anything related to the production of such plants?
I haven't in my research, but that's really interesting, the information that you just provided.
I'm wondering, CITES is kind of a mixed bag. If things are listed on CITES, they get put on the shelf and then there's no research. So have you seen any evidence of, any kind of flexibility there where like the plants are slightly considered threatened, but they'll be able to research that instead of just putting them on a shelf and then they're not accessible for use and trade and no one's studying the supply chain or the sustainability of them at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think having a species list on CITES, is positive and negative because it can be either because there can also be this issue that it's listed, but then there's no management associated with it. So actually then it becomes an ineffective policy in that way. But there is some, it depends on the focus of what the parties want to do at CITES, but there is, for example, they would like to commission a study on rosewood trade. So they'd like to understand the diverges that are in trade at the moment, but also look at what kind of substitute or alternative species are being used as well. So they have been trying to find, as in like CITES community, have been looking at trying to fund a study on that. And then at the moment, there's a lot of research on a non-CITES listed group, which is Boswellia frankincense. And there's been a lot of kind of consultation on that. So there is, I think, room for that. But and I think it's very important to try and make the existing listings effective. And there's a lot of work being done on orchids because they're the largest taxonomic group on CITES. So there's been a lot of reviews of those annotations as well.
It seems like you experienced a lot of trends of biases during CITES. What do you think that's primarily influenced the dictated by? Is it money? Is it the representation of people from these countries? Is it biologists? What's the primary bias there?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's just so many different worldviews in one room. And, some people have a very kind of scientific background. Some people are coming more from a kind of management or economic background. And, people are talking about their kind of sovereign biodiversity that they have in their country. And, you could have a case where some species are being sustainably managed in one country, but the same species is not being sustainably managed in another. And then we get collisions about how to proceed going forward. But yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, which I don't know if I have time to discuss right now.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.